A glint of shattered glass in the scorching red sand. A ranger's heart pounds as she kneels beside two strangers, one barely alive, the other cradling him in desperate silence. 7 days in the Outback, and their story of friendship, pride, and survival is only beginning. Milo Hammond's alarm buzzed dead at 4:30 a.m., but he was already awake. Dawn light filtered through the curtains of his cramped London flat, dancing across shelves crammed with lenses and travel guides. At 24, Milo was living every wildlife photographer's dream, yet the real adventure lay ahead. He sat on the edge of his unmade bed, massaging his wrist, where a fresh bruise from yesterday's studio shoot throbbed. His camera bag stood ready at the footboard, straps neatly coiled, as if waiting for its journey to begin. Across town, Felix Kramer was still asleep on a cramped futon in a shared Berlin apartment. At 23, Felix balanced a headstrong confidence that bordered on reckless with a filmmaker's sensitivity to story. The morning light crept across his face, illuminating eyes that had spent too many nights editing survival-style clips into his YouTube channel. He rolled over and reached for his phone, flicking off a string of unread messages. Milo's final checklist, his own mother's worried texts, even a news alert about a recent heat wave in central Australia. Felix sighed and blinked away sleep, adrenaline overtaking fatigue the moment he recalled the plan. 7 days in the Outback, filming ghost gum forests and ancient rock art. 3 hours later, both men converged at London Heathrow. Milo wearing a faded denim jacket spattered with paint and dust. Felix, hoodie unzipped over a graphic tee, camera straps crisscrossing his chest like a harness. They greeted each other with an easy hug, brothers in wanderlust, and a flurry of jokes about bumpy flights and overpriced airport coffee. Milo held up his passport, bloodshot but determined. "Last chance to back out, Felix." Felix laughed, voice echoing beneath the departure board. "Only if you're too scared of the heat." They boarded a flight to Dubai, then another to Melbourne, spending the bulk of each journey reviewing satellite maps, testing GoPro mounts, and debating whether to bring extra fuel or more water filters. Neither noticed the pitying glance of a fellow passenger who overheard them dismiss warnings about unmarked trails. Neither imagined that their youthful bravado would collide with the vast, indifferent expanse of the Australian interior. By nightfall, they landed in Alice Springs. The dry air hit them like a wall, hot even after sunset. In the rental office, a ranger gave them the same advice all first-timers heard. Stay on marked roads, file their itinerary, check in regularly. Milo nodded dutifully, scanning the park brochure. Felix kissed his fingertips in a mock blessing. They collected a sun-bleached map, 2 jerry cans, and a satellite phone. The ranger's final warning lingered in their pockets like untuned chords, unreal until it was too late. Tomorrow they would drive into the red heart of Australia. Tonight they celebrated with cold beers, an unspoken promise that nothing could stop them now. The sun rose like an amber promise over Alice Springs, igniting the scrubland in a slow burn of gold and rust. Milo Hammond stepped onto the cracked tarmac of the small regional airport, the weight of his camera bag settling into his shoulders like a familiar anchor. The desert wind, surprisingly cool for dawn, tugged at loose straps and whispered through the terminal's open doors. Beside him, Felix Kramer stretched, arching his back with a yawn that turned into a grin. "First real sunrise of our trip," he murmured, eyes bright with anticipation. They collected their dusty, sand-blasted 4x4, a Toyota Land Cruiser that looked like it had already seen one too many Outback seasons, and loaded in their gear with a practiced efficiency. Felix mounted a GoPro on the dashboard, clicking through test shots of the instrument panel, while Milo arranged lenses in a foam-lined case, each click of the latches echoing in the cavernous vehicle. A placard on the visor bore the rental company's stern reminder, "Strictly stay on marked roads." They exchanged a glance. Milo offered a half smile. Felix gave an exaggerated thumbs up. Their first stop was the park ranger's station, an ochre-washed shack perched against a backdrop of ghost gum trees. Ranger Boyd, a broad-shouldered man with a weathered cap and sun-creased collar, greeted them. He spoke in measured tones, pointing out the high-risk zones on a large aerial map. "That ridge beyond the riverbed looks tempting," he said, tapping a jagged line, "but it's unpatrolled. If you head off trail, you could be walking into nothing but empty earth for days." Felix nodded, filming the interaction for his channel's opening segment. "We'll stick to the plan," he said, voice steady. But Milo caught the slight hesitation in his eyes, a conflict between caution and the lure of untouched beauty. Ranger Boyd tapped the map again. "And keep that satellite phone switched on. Check in at midday. Don't assume it'll carry you through storms or battery drain. And watch the temperature, 108 degrees today, maybe hotter by mid-afternoon." Milo ran a hand through his hair, tucking a loose strand behind his ear. He glanced at the jerry can strapped to the back of the Jeep. "Got extra water," he said, trying to sound reassuring. Felix offered him a quick, uneasy laugh. "I brought 2 filters, too. We're more prepared than they think." With a final nod, they climbed into the 4x4 and rolled onto the dusty highway, the ranger's silhouette shrinking behind them. The road stretched out, a ribbon of gray, flanked by low scrub and distant red hills. Felix engaged the camera, speaking in hushed excitement about the day's agenda. Ghost gums at sunrise, then a run to sight the rock art hidden in a narrow gorge. Milo toggled between lens filters, scanning the horizon for storms or stray livestock. As they drove, red dust coated every surface, dashboards, lenses, even their skin. The landscape was both barren and alive, the sparse call of magpies, the sway of spinifex grass in the breeze, the silent watch of termite mounds dotting the plain. Milo felt a thrill, a sense of stepping beyond the edge of the map. Felix, eyes on the horizon, rehearsed voice-over lines about the resilience of this land and the secrets it held. By midday, they reached the ghost gum stand, a cluster of pale, peeling trunks rising like pillars from the rust-red soil. Felix leapt out, camera rolling as Milo followed, adjusting his wide-angle lens. The ranger's words hummed in Milo's mind, a distant echo he promised himself he wouldn't ignore. Too late, he would learn that the desert accepts no bribes, answers no pleas, and punishes pride with a silence deeper than any canyon. But for now, they were 2 friends chasing a dream, unaware that every step farther from the marked trail whispered their names into the waiting dust. By dawn's pale light, the Land Cruiser rattled onto the unsealed road that led away from Alice Springs. The gravel beneath the tires dying a relentless, tinny hymn, a reminder that in the Outback, nothing moved without noise. Milo Hammond sat beside Felix, the morning chill already fading beneath a swelling heat. Through the windshield, vast landscapes unfurled, low scrub, russet hills, and the hazy promise of salt flats shimmering like distant glass. Felix flicked through camera angles on his GoPro, voice low with anticipation. This stretch is where the earth flips. Red sand gives way to bleached white, perfect for contrast shots. He pointed ahead, where a ribbon of ivory stretched toward the horizon. Milo swallowed against a sudden dryness in his throat. He clicked a fresh SD card into place, fingers brushing against the cool plastic as though seeking reassurance. As they crested a low rise, the salt flat opened before them, a diamond field etched by ancient seas. The sun, still low, cast prismatic flares across the crusted surface. Milo lifted his tripod, careful not to jar the delicate sockets. He positioned the wide-angle lens to capture the surreal expanse, pressing record as Felix described the phenomenon in a soft, reverent tone, how Aboriginal ancestors walked these flats, carrying stories woven into every ripple. Their voices echoed lightly, carried off by a ghost wind. Felix hopped down, adjusting the frame as Milo crouched to photograph a bird track imprint, 3 slender toes pressed into crystalline sand. "Look at this," Milo whispered, breathless. He snapped close-ups of the delicate pattern. Felix leaned in, eyes alight. "Nature's signature," he murmured, his German accent softening the words. They spent an hour there, moving between wide vistas and minute details. Felix often drifted into narration, his voice animated. "Here, the light plays tricks. You think you see water, but it's just the refraction of heat." Milo found himself laughing at Felix's dramatic reenactment of a mirage-stricken explorer, then joining in with playful barbs about film school theatrics. Each jest felt like lifeblood, binding them together amid the emptiness. Beyond the salt came the gorge where the rock art waited, slivers of shelter carved into red sandstone. They parked beneath a groaning eucalyptus, the air turning cooler in the shadow. Milo brushed dust off his boots and reached into his pack for water. The first cool sip landed like relief. Felix scouted ahead with his camera, calling. "Back. You'll want this angle for the hand stencils. Over here, the ochre pigment glows under morning sun." They walked single file into the canyon's mouth. The walls rose steep and smooth, painted with faded ochre figures. Kangaroos, human silhouettes, swirling symbols whose meaning slumbered in time. Milo pressed his palm on a nearby boulder, still warm from the sun, feeling the resonance of centuries. He raised his camera, framing a run of stenciled hands at eye level, and whispered, "People lived here, trusted the land to tell their stories." Felix hovered, capturing ambient sound, the soft scrape of sand underfoot, the distant call of a cockatoo. When he switched the mic off, he offered Milo a grin. "We're living their story, aren't we?" Milo returned the smile, though his heart thudded with something more complex than excitement. Here, at the edge of known paths, the land both welcomed and cautioned. He looked up at the sky, a boundless blue that pressed down with heat and promise. They were not just visitors, they were guests in a realm that measured time in stone and survival. And their journey into this ancient heart had only just begun. The land cruiser's engine growled as they bounced over a crusted salt channel, Felix at the wheel, Milo navigating with a tattered map spread across his lap. The sun climbed higher, spotlighting every crack in the white surface, every flake of red dust that clung to their boots. Felix jabbed at the GoPro's record button. "Okay, we're going deeper than most. This is where the real magic happens," he said, voice crackling with excitement. Milo glanced up, heart fluttering. He felt the same thrill, but the ranger's warning, "Stay on marked roads," gnawed at him like an unsettled echo. He closed the map, sliding it into the door pocket. "Just keep an eye on that gauge," he said, nodding toward the temperature dial. Felix laughed. "We're fine. She's air-cooled, remember?" He jabbed the accelerator, and the cruiser lunged forward. They swept around a bend, skirting a bed of jagged halite crystals. Felix guided the vehicle onto a narrow strip of packed earth, shouting, "Watch this shot! Me driving through the abyss!" He leaned forward, framing the scene. Milo gripped the edge of his seat, bracing for another jolt. The chassis shuddered beneath them, a tremor that raced through the frame like a warning. Then came the sickening snap, a steel groan that vibrated in their bones. The wheels skidded to one side. Felix slammed on the brakes, tires grinding against the salt. For a moment, silence, broken only by the high-pitched whine of stressed metal. The cruiser settled, listing, the back axle sagging toward the ground. Felix killed the engine. The sudden quiet felt like an emptiness yawning beneath the sky. Dust drifted around them as they climbed out, boots crunching on salt shards. Milo's breath hitched when he saw the shattered axle shaft, twisted like a broken limb. He crouched, inspecting the damage. "It's completely snapped," he said, voice flat. His pulse pounded in his ears. Felix knelt beside him, helmet of sweat gleaming on his forehead. He traced the fracture line with a gloved finger, eyes dark. "We could try to jury-rig something," he muttered, glancing back at the map. "There's a dry creek bed 2 miles east. Maybe there's cell coverage from the ridge." Milo shook his head, stomach tight. "The satellite phone. Batteries at 60%. If we hike out, that's our only shot." He met Felix's gaze. "We should call for help." Felix's jaw clenched. He flicked open the satellite phone, scrolling contacts. His finger hovered over Ranger HQ. Then he looked at Milo's camera bag and the GoPro blinking at them. "We came for the story," he said softly. "Let's see what's beyond the creek bed first. We'll film the repair process. It's good content." Milo felt a lump in his throat. He thought of the ranger's stern face, of maps that ended in nothing but open sand. "Or we could risk 4 more hours lost out there," he said, voice quivering. "We don't even know how long repair would take." Felix tucked the phone away. His lips curled in a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Trust me," he said. "We'll get through it." Milo stood, dusting salt from his knees. The sun beat down mercilessly, a judge presiding over their choice. He reached for a jerry can, then paused, heart heavy with doubt. Beside him, Felix adjusted his camera, ready to capture every moment, defiant, reckless, determined. And so they set off on foot, deeper into the blistering unknown. The heat hammered against them like a drumbeat, relentless, unforgiving. Felix led the way, shouldering his camera gear and the clipped GoPro, each step stirring whirlwinds of dust. Milo followed, water pack at his back feeling lighter by. The minute. The Land Cruiser sat abandoned, a silent monument to their overconfidence, its twisted axle glinting beneath the African sun. Ahead stretched a dry creek bed, its stony floor pocked with driftwood and bleached bones, a natural corridor through the unbroken plain. Felix studied the sun-bleached map again, but the wind roared past them, snatching it free of his grip. It fluttered once, twice, then spiraled into a nearby ravine with a mocking finality. "Shit," he hissed, lunging after it, but the canyon wall swallowed the scrap of paper. Milo reached out, resting a hand on his friend's shoulder. "It's gone," he said quietly, eyes darting to the jagged walls. "No map, no clear route." Felix exhaled, his voice trembling in the heat haze. "GPS still works." He tapped a wrist-mounted unit, but the screen flickered and died, its battery finally succumbing to their days of filming. Panic flickered in his eyes. "Okay," he said, drawing a breath that rattled like dry twigs. "Okay, let's just follow the creek bed north until we hit the marked trail on the map," he lied, swallowing hard. Milo nodded, swallowing his own fear. "At least it's a feature we can track." He wiped sweat from his brow and kicked at a pebble. "Lead on." They picked their way over the sun-cracked stones, feet shifting on loose gravel. Felix's breath came in short pants. Milo's every exhale rattled in his chest. Shadows of ghost gums leaned above them, but offered no shade, only silent witness to their struggle. Their footsteps echoed in brittle rhythm, crunch, shuffle, crunch. An hour passed, then 2. Each bend showed only more scorched earth. Miles of nothing. Every so often, Milo paused, lifting his sunburned face skyward, as if imploring the clouds to remember mercy. Felix filmed the monotonous landscape, his narration now thin with strain. "If you're ever in this situation, stay on the route." He trailed off. By mid-afternoon, the temperature gauge in Milo's mind flicked into the red. His water bladder sat half empty, and each sip burned like fire down his throat. He stopped again, pressing a hand to his heaving chest. "Let's rest." Felix dropped his pack to the ground, knees buckling. Milo settled beside him, dragging the makeshift sled, fiberglass rods and torn tent fabric, into the shade of a lone spinifex clump. They both stared at the horizon, at the emptiness that pressed in on them from all sides. "It's farther than I thought," Felix admitted, voice hollow. He reached for the sled's rope, tracing each frayed strand with a finger. "How are you holding up?" Milo closed his eyes, trying to still the spinning world. "Ankle hurts," he muttered. He flexed his leg, a stab of pain lancing through him. "But I'm okay." Felix met his gaze, guilt and fear warring on his face. "We'll make it," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He clicked the GoPro back on, more for ritual than hope. "Keep rolling," he whispered. "We have to document this." Milo watched as Felix lifted the camera to his eye, capturing the gaunt line of his friend's jaw and the endless plain beyond. In that moment, Milo understood. Their story, once an adventure, had become a testament, framed in dust and danger, and each step now carried the weight of survival itself. Daylight fractured through trembling spinifex blades as Felix hoisted the makeshift sled, determined to press on. Milo limped beside him, each step a serrated reminder of his injury. An ankle already swollen, the bandage beneath crusted with dust and sweat. The cracked earth underfoot stretched infinitely, barren but for the occasional silhouette of a scraggy bush. Heat shimmered off the stones, blurring the horizon into a wavering line of blue and red. They reached the lip of a shallow gorge carved by a long-vanished creek. Across the divide, a steep wall of sandstone beckoned, its surface etched with ancient grooves and small ledges. Felix paused, studying the climb. "If we can scramble up there, we might find a plateau with cell coverage," he said, voice tight with hope. He raised the GoPro to capture the ascent. Milo nodded, swallowing dry air. Taking a deep breath, Milo tested his weight on the bad ankle. A flare of pain shot up his calf. He swallowed and squared his shoulders. "Let's do it." Felix led, finding handholds in the warm rock, calling back instructions. "Left foot here, over your shoulder, deep breath." Milo followed, careful at first, fingertips grazing sandstone. His boot found a crevice. He pushed upward. Dust trickled down in shifting trails. On hands and knees, he gained a small ledge. Beneath him, the abyss yawned, empty and merciless. Higher still, the ledge narrowed. Felix clambered up to a flared overhang, turning toward Milo with a grin of relief. "Almost there." He stretched a hand down. Milo lunged, but the sandstone crumbled. His foot punched through a brittle patch, sending him off balance. He swung wildly, scrambling for a grip that wasn't there. Time slowed. A shard of rock gouged his palm. His pelvis slammed against the wall. Pain blossomed through his body. He tumbled sideways, arms flailing, and dropped the last 2 feet to a ledge below, but his bad ankle twisted beneath him. A tortured crack echoed in his ears. He gasped, collapsing to the ground, every nerve alive with agony. Felix's shout fractured the hot air. He scrambled down, scooping Milo into his arms. The camera slipped from Milo's grasp, spinning downward until the lens shattered against stone. Felix caught an arm, tears pooling in his eyes. "Milo!" His voice broke. He gently eased Milo onto the ledge, pressing a hand to the injured ankle. It bulged at an unnatural angle, the skin taut and hot. Milo hissed through clenched teeth, sweat slick on his forehead. I can't stand." His voice was a whisper lost in the heat haze. Felix tore a strip from his shirt, binding the ankle as best he could. Dust and blood seeped through the fabric. He searched Milo's face, panic in his dark eyes. "We have to get down," Felix said, voice trembling. He braced himself, sliding an arm beneath Milo's shoulders. It's too high to wait. With painstaking care, Felix half-dragged, half-lowered Milo back toward the creek bed, every rock and ridge a fresh torment. The GoPro lay broken at the cliff's base, a silent witness to their folly. As they reached the floor, the sun hovered high, merciless. Felix knelt beside Milo, pressing his forehead to his friend's. "I'm so sorry," he murmured. "I'll get you out of here." Milo's breath shook. His world narrowed to the scorching stone beneath him and the desperate blue sky above, two elements that measured their fate in heat and distance. And in that moment, beneath the indifferent sun, they understood the true cost of pride. Darkness fell like a suffocating blanket, swallowing the broken landscape whole. Felix Kramer huddled beside the makeshift sled, his arms wrapped tightly around Milo Hammond's trembling form. The temperature plummeted, Milo's fevered skin growing ice-cold beneath the ragged bandage. In the fading light, the spinifex cast long, ghostly shadows across the cracked creek bed, each one a silent sentinel to their plight. Felix fumbled for the remaining matches, palms slick with sweat, despite the cold. The first strike hissed and died. The second sputtered before fading to smoke. He struck again, heart pounding, and managed a flicker of flame against a handful of dry grass. The little fire sputtered to life, a frail beacon in the void. Milo's teeth chattered in a broken rhythm, and Felix jammed his jacket around him, sacrificing his own layers to warm his friend's body. Night noises emerged, the distant cry of a dingo, the rasp of wind against rock, the intermittent groan of cooling metal from their abandoned land cruiser. Every sound amplified Felix's dread, each snap of twig or rustle of leaves a threat. He pressed the GoPro to his chest, the cracked lens reflecting the dancing firelight. Recording had once seemed vital, now it felt obscene, a mockery of their desperation. Milo lay against him, eyes half-lidded, lips murmuring broken words. "I'm sorry." His voice carried the cadence of delirium. Felix shook him gently. "Milo, stay with me. Don't. Not now." But Milo's gaze drifted upward, unfocused. He reached out as if trying to grasp something unseen. "The wall," he whispered. "It's alive." Felix glanced at the sandstone cliffs encircling them, flat, jagged walls that earlier had promised refuge. Now they loomed like ancient monsters, breathing in the moonlight. He tightened his grip on Milo's shoulder. "You're safe," he whispered. "I'm here." Milo's breathing hitched. "It's shifting." He groaned, pressing his face into Felix's jacket. Sweat beaded on Felix's brow as he fought back tears. He rocked Milo gently, willing him to wake, to rouse. But sleep, broken, haunted, pulled him deeper into fever dreams. In the flicker of firelight, Felix thought he saw shapes materialize on the canyon walls. Hand stencils, like the ones they'd admired hours before, dancing in and out of sight. Each outline reminded him of promises made, to stay on trail, to film responsibly, to return home. Guilt clawed through him. He pressed his forehead to Milo's, whispering apologies into the cold air. Hours passed, measured only by the dimming flames. Felix tore small strips of fabric from his shirt, stuffing them into Milo's neck and jacket to stave off frostbite. His own jacket lay open, shoulders stiffening against the chill. He dared not close his eyes for fear that when he opened them again, Milo would be gone. Finally, as the moon dipped low, Milo's shivering slowed. He drifted between worlds, past and present, life and something darker. Felix held him unwaveringly, voice a soft litany. "Hold on, please, hold on." In that endless night, the two friends existed only in the fragile warmth of a dying fire, bound by fear and the silent vow that one would not leave the other behind. And amid the outback's indifferent stillness, Felix prayed that dawn would bring mercy before their story was written in dust and silence forever. Dawn's pale light revealed the full toll of their journey: cracked lips, parched throats, and sun-etched lines carving grief into their faces. When the first subtle crack of morning drifted across the red stones, Felix Kramer reached back into the pack for a final sip of water, only to find the bladder bone dry. A hollow groan escaped him even before he met Milo Hammond's anxious gaze. With nowhere to turn and no liquid relief on the horizon, panic threaded through Felix's veins like poison. Milo lay propped awkwardly on the sled, blood-streaked bandages wrapped around his swollen ankle. His eyes, rimmed with feverish red, flicked to Felix. "There's nothing left," Felix whispered, voice raw. He squeezed the empty bladder in his hand as if coaxing a drop of mercy from its heat-softened walls. Milo's throat bobbed with a rough swallow that brought no comfort. Each breath they drew tasted of dust and desperation. A buzz of wings grew louder, drawing their attention to the neat circles of flies nesting in Milo's wound. Felix leapt up to shoo them away, slapping at the air with frantic hands, but they returned almost immediately. He pressed a trembling cloth to the cut on Milo's leg, trying to staunch both flies and blood, though the effort only seemed to ignite a fresh well of crimson that stained the fabric deeper. Milo hissed, eyes clenching shut. "Felix," he murmured, voice thin, "please." Felix knelt again, swallowing past the lump of guilt lodged in his throat. Outside, the heat was already climbing, 108 degrees by the cracked gauge on his wrist. They had run out of water almost 24 hours ago, and what little shade the gnarled ghost gums offered now seemed a cruel mockery. Felix poured every drop of forgiveness into Milo's shaking hand. "I'm so sorry," he breathed. "I'll fix this." He stood, scanning the barren horizon for any sign of life. No birds, no trucks, no distant plume of dust indicating a passing vehicle. Only ochre plains stretched to a sky so bright it hurt to look. Felix returned to the Land Cruiser's rear, tearing open the toolkit in a futile search for water containers he hadn't thought to refill. Inside, only rattling wrenches and empty fuel jerry cans stared back. He shut the tailgate with a clang that echoed across the flatland. Milo's groans drifted faintly from the sled. Felix knelt beside him again, brushing a lock of sweat-matted hair from his brow. "We need to move, or we'll bake here," he said, voice steadier than he felt. He hoisted Milo's upper body onto his shoulders, using the sled straps to secure him. The makeshift rig slipped beneath their combined weight, groaning in protest. With a deep breath, Felix placed one foot in front of the other, each step a negotiation with agony, dragging both of them toward an uncertain edge. As they slid across the bone-white crust, the sun painted their long shadows ahead, two distorted figures tethered by duty and desperation. Neither spoke, for words would have been hollow echoes in the vast stillness. Instead, Felix focused on the rhythm of their movement, on the soft scrape of sled against salt, and on Milo's ragged breathing as proof that they still clung to life. In the merciless glare of the outback, they pressed on, driven by fear and a threadbare hope that salvation might lie just beyond the next rise. And even as their strength waned, the fragile bond between them burned brighter than the relentless sun overhead. Felix's shoulders burned beneath the weight of Milo's inert form as he heaved the makeshift sled across the salt-crusted plain. Each scrape of canvas on mineral grit echoed like an accusation. Every foot of progress a testament to their stubborn will and to the folly that had brought them here. The sun sat high, an unforgiving sentinel that beat down on Felix's neck, searing sweat into his shirt. Milo's shallow breaths rattled in his chest, and Felix feared that each gasp might be the last. He paused at the crest of a low ridge, tracing his friend's dust-caked face. Milo's eyelids fluttered, as though chasing a memory too distant to hold. Felix knelt, pressing a cool hand to his brow. "Stay with me," he murmured, voice rough. A flicker of recognition passed in Milo's eyes before they drifted shut. Felix closed them softly, leaning his head against Milo's shoulder, and the world collapsed into a single, urgent thought. Keep moving. A flash of home, Berlin on a rainy evening, cut through his panic. He and Milo had sold one of Felix's old cameras for pizza and cheap beer, laughing beneath strings of yellow cafe lights. Milo's easy grin had felt like a promise. No matter how far they strayed from comfort, they'd always find their way back together. Felix blinked back tears. That promise teetered on the edge of the horizon, fading with every labored step. He rose, gathering strength from memory. At his side, the sled creaked, a wounded animal dragged unwillingly toward salvation. Felix pressed on, turning his face into the wind. His voice, hoarse with dust, rose in a soft incantation. "Just a bit further. You can do this." Behind the chant lay his own fear, the gnawing belief that they might never leave this white tomb. Another memory surfaced. Milo, on his 22nd birthday, perched atop a wind-swept hill in the Scottish Highlands, camera in hand. He'd framed a soaring eagle against slate skies, then passed the viewfinder to Felix. "Your turn," he'd said. Felix had captured the bird's wingspan just as it caught a thermal draft. The image had become his favorite, proof that friendship could elevate the ordinary. He clutched that memory like a talisman, willing its promise to rebuke the desert silence. Distance fell behind them in ragged miles. Felix's tongue stuck to his dry lips, his throat raw from pleading prayers and whispered apologies. The sled jolted over a half-buried rock, and Milo stirred, a faint moan escaping his cracked lips. Felix dropped to one knee, pressing a palm to the torn bandage. Blood had darkened the fabric. Flies gathered in spite of everything. "I'm here," he whispered. "I won't leave you." With renewed resolve, Felix levered himself upward, wrapping numb fingers around the sled's rope. He pulled until the muscles in his arms trembled, then took another staggering step forward, and another. In that endless expanse, each stride was a revolution against despair, each drop of sweat a vow that their story would not end here. When the sun dipped toward late afternoon, Felix stumbled to a halt, eyes fixed on a distant rise that he swore rippled with promise. His chest heaved, Milo's breathing steadied beside him. In the vast hush of the outback, the two figures, one lifeless, one determined, stood poised between life and oblivion. And for a moment, hope shone brighter than any scorching sky. Across 2 continents, alarms blared in empty homes. In London, Milo Hammond's mother, Elaine, pressed her forehead against the cool glass of a rain-spattered window, phone clenched in trembling fingers. Days had passed without a single check-in. Her calls to Milo's satchel of numbers all rang unanswered. Each ring echoed like a shutter closing on hope. She thumbed through messages from friends who'd seen the online post. "Your son's overdue in the Outback." But none contained new news, only the same frantic pleas for any scrap of information. In a tidy Berlin living room, Felix Kramer's sister, Lena, paced amid open suitcases destined for the airport. She had last heard Felix's enthusiastic "I'm safe" voice memo 2 mornings ago, sent from a patch of pink-hued dunes. Since then, silence. Lena tapped her foot against the hardwood, staring at Felix's camera bags by the door. She replayed his last video clip, the one where he promised to return with footage of ghost gum forests. Her heart clenched each time she saw dust streak his face, bright eyes flickering with possibility. Now possibility felt cruel, an empty frame waiting for a lost image. Back in London, Elaine dialed the Australian Search and Rescue hotline, her voice cracking as she described Milo's itinerary. Flight numbers, rental agreement, the GPS coordinates he'd bragged about reaching. "He wouldn't go off trail," she whispered into the receiver, tears soaking the phone. "He promised." The operator's calm assurances sounded distant, like wind through a canyon, comforting in theory, but failing to fill the void. Hundreds of miles away, at the family home in Berlin, Lena stared at a map of the Northern Territory pinned to her wall, red ink marking the planned route. Felix had circled water sources and radio check-in points. Now each circle seemed like a tombstone. She dialed Felix's number again, breath catching when it went to voicemail. "Please just pick up." She left yet another message, voice breaking. "I'm coming for you." Meanwhile, back in Alice Springs, Ranger Karen Talbot reviewed dusty logs from remote wildlife cameras. No movement, no sign of two young men. She listened to the plea from overseas parents routed through her station. Frantic. Whispers, stifled sobs, unanswerable questions. She closed her eyes, remembering her own brother's disappearance years ago, and the helplessness that had nearly broken her. She tapped a worn photograph taped to her desk, her brother's smiling face against a backdrop of eucalyptus. She breathed deep and typed a new dispatch. Shift the grid eastward along the dried creek beds. We're not giving up. That night, across time zones, both Elaine and Lena sank to their knees, hands clasped, voices trembling prayers into the darkness. They clung to faith like a lifeline, repeating Milo and Felix's names into the void. Bring them home. Keep them safe. Two mothers, two sisters, united by fear, waiting for the next call, the call that would tell them their boys were still out there somewhere, clinging to hope against the silence of the desert. Sunlight glinted off the polished table in the Alice Springs Search and Rescue Center, illuminating maps strewn with colored pins and annotated flight paths. Ranger Karen Talbot leaned over the layout, tracing the faint outline of the dry creek bed where the Land Cruiser had last pinged its tracker. Around her, a half-dozen uniformed officers murmured into radios, eyes flicking between satellite imagery. And weather updates. The air smelled of burnt coffee and urgency. Commander Harris stood at Karen's shoulder, his face creased with concern. "No sign on drone cams from yesterday," he said, voice low. "Winds picked up. Dust storms could be erasing tracks faster than we can find them." He tapped the table. "We have to get boots on the ground before the trail vanishes." Karen nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. She brought up thermal imaging footage on a screen, blurs of shifting heat, but no clear human form. "Rangers Willow and Singh will depart at first light," she said, pulling out her tablet. "Helicopter support on standby, weather permitting. And I want a full sweep of any salt flat SOS signals. If they scratched help into the ground, the white crust might reflect our searchlight." An officer raised a hand. "Ma'am, the German embassy called. They're pressuring for updates." Harris allowed a grim smile. "I'll handle them. Focus on the field." Karen tapped the send icon and felt her heart loosen a fraction. Yet every passing minute magnified the stakes. These were more than coordinates and camera rigs. They were two young men whose every breath counted. She powered down the tablet and turned to Officer Singh, who stood by the radio console. "What's our ETA for the night vision sweep?" 20 minutes, once the choppers refuel," Singh answered. His jaw tightened as he monitored the static-ridden channels. "We'll grid east and west of the last known position, moving outward at 2-kilometer intervals." Outside the station's reinforced doors, the Outback's afternoon glare was already fading to bruised dusk. Karen slipped into her boots and pulled on her wide-brimmed hat. She shouldered her pack, first aid kit, extra water, GPS repeater, and felt its familiar weight steady her. This wasn't her first search, but every mission carried the same fissure of fear, not because she doubted her skills, but because she knew how easy it was to overlook the smallest clue. In the hangar, the helicopter's rotors whirled to life, sending dust spiraling around the waiting Rangers. Karen climbed into the cockpit beside Pilot Evans, the wind whipping her hair. She exhaled. 2 weeks ago, she'd played tag with kangaroos across these plains. Now she hunted for two figures swallowed by its scale. As the chopper lifted, beams of powerful LED lights carved arcs through the gathering dusk. Below, the river of salt flats stretched in spectral white, a maze of shadows and brightness. Karen's eyes roamed the ground, scanning for any sign: an overturned branch, a smear of blood, the glint of a camera lens. On the radio, Singh's voice crackled. "Sector Bravo complete. Heading south to Charlie." His tone was steady, disciplined. Karen replied with a curt, "Copy," then widened her sweep. In that hushed half-light, the desert felt both immense and intimate, every dune a possible refuge, every ravine a potential grave. But Karen refused to think of failure. Each pulse of her searchlight was a promise. She would not leave this land without bringing them home. And as the chopper banked into the silent plains, her determination burned brighter than the fading sun. By midday, Alice Springs' local news studio hummed with frantic energy. Reporters clustered around a bank of monitors displaying grainy satellite images and blurred social media clips. Had Outback missing trended worldwide, a cascade of retweets, panicked pleas, and wild speculation. One self-styled survival expert live-streamed from his living room, proclaiming that anyone can survive with nothing but a Swiss Army knife, advice that made parents shudder and rangers cringe. On a scrolling ticker, updates from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation alternated with sensational headlines: "Backpackers' final footsteps, miracle or myth? Did they stage their own disappearance for views? Searchers battled us storms and time." Behind the glass, news director Simone Clark pinched the bridge of her nose. Footage from Felix's last known vlog, sun-bleached landscapes, confident narration, had been spliced with stock images of dehydration and hallucination, creating a narrative more thriller than truth. In Berlin, Felix's mother, her suspicions twisting into something darker, found a tabloid claiming he'd abandoned Milo for his own safety. She slammed her fist onto the table, scattering printouts of genuine messages Felix had sent. His joke about ghost gum selfies, his promise to call daily. Tears blurred the headlines. "They don't know him," she choked out, bookmarking a family group chat where friends circulated maps and emergency kit tutorials. Every shared article, every retweet, felt like a betrayal of the real story. Meanwhile, Elaine in London faced her own torment. Her phone vibrated with alerts. A charity page soliciting donations for stranded tourists. A viral video of people pouring water bottles into the sand, pretending to hydrate footprints. She scrolled until her vision blurred and shut off the screen, hands trembling. Why did strangers care so little about facts, she wondered, when the truth was so fragile? Back at the Search and Rescue Center, Ranger Talbot watched the storm of misinformation rage online. She clicked through conspiracy threads claiming the SOS carving was faked, or that the backpackers had staged the wreck for clicks. She forced a half-smile and logged onto the station's official page to post a measured update. Search continues. We urge the public to use official channels for information. She tagged the relevant hotlines and repeated the plea. No speculation, only verified reports. Outside in the dusty streets, locals clutched laminated flyers, their eyes skyward in anxious hope. Tour buses stopped at roadhouses, drivers asking if the missing were spotted on the Stewart Highway. Every rumor ballooned into new red flag sightings. A lone figure along a ridge, footprints leading to nowhere, a heat vision blip that turned out to be a flock of cockatoos. By nightfall, the frenzy showed no sign of abating. Cameras still rolled, reporters still raced for exclusives, and families still waited. In the chaos, the lines between fact and fiction had blurred, yet beneath the noise remained a singular truth. 2 young men were out there, their lives hanging on the slender thread of the ranger's next find. And until that thread snapped, hope would resist the pull of rumor and fear. The first light of dawn found Ranger Karen Talbot parked at the edge of a skeletal creek bed, the engine of her Toyota patrol truck ticking as it cooled. She'd risen before sunrise, hauling gear for a long day traversing unmarked tracks. The morning air was crisp, a rare reprieve before the desert sun climbed above 40 degrees. Karen checked her GPS repeater, recalibrated the antenna, then tapped open her handheld radio. Static greeted her, a familiar companion in these wide-open spaces. A crackling voice interrupted her routine check-in. "Ranger Talbot, this is Wildlife Ops. We've got an urgent call. Trapped Joey near the old Ghost Gum north of Sector Delta. Thermal sensors picked up a small heat signature. Could be injured." Karen's chest tightened. Ghost Gums marked the boundary where search grids for the missing backpackers had ended. Every signal here bore a double meaning: a Joey in peril or 2 young men clinging to life. "Copy, Ops," she replied, sliding the radio into her pack. She swung the patrol truck into gear, tires biting into loose gravel. As she rolled away, her mind flickered to another day, 3 years ago, when her own brother's laughter echoed beneath similar gums before he vanished without trace. The memory was a raw wound she covered with duty and determination. Her heart stung at the thought of any creature, human or animal, abandoned in these plains. She drove in silence, the truck's headlights carving arcs through ghostly trunks. The flat plain stretched out in ochre waves. At each mile marker, she glanced at the horizon, half expecting to see footprints or a glimmer of fabric. But today's search was for a kangaroo Joey, and the protocol felt both mundane and urgent. A life mattered, no matter the size. 20 minutes later, Karen crested a rise. The Ghost Gum Grove lay ahead, pale trunks rising from red dirt, their bark curled like peeling paper. She cut the engine and slipped into her boots, securing water and first aid gear. Beneath the nearest tree, a sapling scraped against broken branches. She heard a soft whimper. Karen knelt, sweeping her torch across a tangle of spinifex. A Joey's head poked through, a mottled bundle of fur, one hind leg trapped beneath a fallen limb. Its eyes were wide with fear. Gently, Karen eased the branch aside and scooped the Joey into her arms, murmuring soothing words. The animal's rapid heartbeat thumped against her chest, a tiny drum of life. As she wrapped the Joey in a spare blanket, her radio crackled again, this time with a call from her base. "Karen, new SOS signal detected. Coordinates coming your way. Possible human distress marker." She froze, the Joey cradled in her arms. Another SOS, carved in sand, waiting to be found. Her heart hammered in tandem with the Joey's pulse. She placed the Joey gently in the back of the truck, then climbed into the driver's seat. Fingers trembled as she input the new coordinates. This was no longer a simple wildlife rescue. It was the culmination of every search she'd led. The same hands that freed the Joey would soon uncover the fate of 2 lost backpackers. Karen exhaled, steeling herself. She glanced once more at the Joey, its small body rising and falling in a fragile rhythm. "Hang on," she whispered, voice steady. "We've got more work to do." With siren lights off, she pulled back onto the track, bound for the SOS point. A message in the sand that promised hope, dread, and perhaps redemption for everyone waiting back home. The morning sky ripened from steel gray to pale gold as Ranger Karen Talbot's truck rumbled across the salt-encrusted plain. Her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, each mile bringing her closer to the SOS coordinates. She killed the engine at the edge of the salt flat and stepped onto the bleached surface, the ground so hard it crackled beneath her boots. The desert was silent, except for the soft hiss of wind across crystallized salt, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Karen turned on her handheld radar, its needle spinning until it stilled, pointing toward a barren stretch where the white crust gave way to rust-red sand. The sun climbed higher, already stinging through her uniform, and Karen shaded her eyes, scanning the horizon. At first, she saw nothing but shimmering haze and fractured light. Then, beyond a low drift of wind-blown sand, something disturbed the flat's monotony. 6 tall letters carved deeply into the earth. Help. The word yawned at her, each letter half a meter tall, edges crisp against the scorched sand. The grooves betrayed no footprints directly beside them, but the depth of the cuts spoke of desperate effort, too deliberate for an animal, too raw for casual scraping. Karen's breath caught. She checked her watch. 9:42 a.m., July 15th, 2022. Exactly 7 days since the backpackers had vanished beyond marked trails. Her training kicked in. She dropped her pack, opened it, and retrieved a measuring rod and camera. First, she photographed the entire word from multiple angles, logging wind direction and the roll of the sand around each trench. Then she knelt, running a gloved finger along the southward stroke of the H. The sand was firm, recently carved, no signs yet of a dust storm erasing its edges. Her eyes flicked upward, searching for footprints or the faintest disturbance beyond the letters. A flicker of movement caught her eye. A small, dark shape, half buried in a shallow dip, maybe 50 meters northeast. She refocused her optics, heart thudding. It looked like fabric. Slowly, she eased forward, mindful to leave no new prints. Her boots whispered across the sand as she navigated toward the shape. The closer she came, the more distinct the colors. Dulled olive drab, streaked with red dust. A camouflaged jacket, abandoned. Beside it, half a boot protruded from the sand. Karen swallowed hard and knelt, careful now to move with deliberate calm. She reached out and brushed the sand from a tattered sleeve, revealing a GoPro mount and a water-streaked label, M. Hammond. For a moment, time fractured in the desert glare. The word help behind her was no longer a message in isolation, but a promise of rescue. Karen stood, adrenaline sharpening her senses. She swept the area with her binoculars, spotting 2 faint figures crumpled against a heat-baked branch some 20 meters beyond the jacket. One lay motionless, the other, a gaunt silhouette, hunched beside him. Karen exhaled, steeling herself. This was the reckoning point, the moment when meticulous search protocols met raw human need. She clipped her radio to her shoulder. "Base, this is Ranger Talbot. I have visual on 2 individuals at SOS site, requesting medical evacuation. Immediate." As she waited for the radio to crackle back, Karen knelt by the help carving once more, running her finger along its edge in a silent vow. She would not let them slip away. In the vast stillness, the desert had finally spoken, and she would carry their story out of the red dust and back into light. A low hum vibrated through the air as Karen Talbot raced her truck across the salt-crusted plain, sirens silent at her request. The fractured light of late morning cast long shadows beneath the ghost gum branch where 2 figures lay. She killed the engine and sprinted forward in boots, kicking up fine white spray, heart hammering with each step. Felix Kramer sat on the scorched earth, one arm wrapped around Milo Hammond's frail form, the other cradling his blood-streaked head to his lap. Milo's skin was gray beneath layers of dust and fever, breaths shallow and uneven. Felix's chest rose and fell in tremulous spasms, the GoPro dangling from his neck, catching flecks of sun. When Karen reached them, Felix looked up, tears streaking tracks of salt and dirt. "Thank God," he whispered, voice cracking. Karen knelt beside Milo, fingers cool against the hot bandages. She checked his pulse, weak but present, then scanned for wounds. A gnawed fly net lay discarded behind him, the remnants clinging to his ankle. She found the makeshift tourniquet Felix had wrapped, blood dark beneath the fabric. Calmly, Karen eased the binding loose and replaced it with a field dressing, her practiced movements careful and assured. Behind her, Felix hovered, eyes haunted. "He's burning up," he murmured, brushing a hand through Milo's matted hair. "He fell. I tried to carry him." Every syllable trembled with guilt. Karen placed a steadying hand on Felix's shoulder. "You did what you could," she said, voice low. "You kept him alive." Milo's eyelids fluttered, his gaze unfocused. He murmured in broken English, then a slur of German. "Bedankt, Bruder." Felix leaned closer, pressing his forehead to Milo's. "I'm here, Milo. I'm not leaving you." Karen unfolded her radio mic. "Medevac down," she reported, glancing skyward as a distant whoop, whoop of rotors answered. She kept one hand on Milo's wrist, watching for signs of shock, and the other ready to guide Felix if he faltered. The emptiness of the plane pressed in on them, but here, within that smallest circle of rescue, it felt almost sacred. The helicopter arced overhead, dust swirling in its downdraft. Felix rose unsteadily as Karen helped Milo to sit, sliding an arm beneath his shoulders. Together they lifted him, legs dangling, into the chopper's open hatch. Felix hesitated, Jane light illuminating the dust like motes of prayer. Karen nodded, and Felix climbed in last, kneeling beside Milo and holding his hand. As the skids rose from the ground, Karen watched the pair through the haze of stirred salt. Felix's shoulders sagged in relief and exhaustion. Milo's head rested against the fuselage wall, eyes half closed, but alive. Karen exhaled, a whisper carried on the wind. "You're safe now." Below them, the white plain stretched infinite and indifferent, bearing the scars of their ordeal. But up here, in the tight cocoon of rotor blades and hope, the two friends were bound for the first time in days by something stronger than fear, the promise of tomorrow. As the Outback receded beneath them, Karen turned the truck toward home, already preparing the next chapter of their story. Survival, healing, and the long road back from the edge. The helicopter's downdraft shattered the dusty silence, sending a tidal wave of white salt swirling across the plain. Inside the cabin, the thrum of the twin rotors vibrated through Felix Kramer's bones as he knelt beside Milo Hammond, gripping his friend's hand as though it might anchor him in space. Milo's eyes fluttered open, confusion and relief mingling in their unfocused gaze. Above them, Ranger Karen Talbot shouted through the roar, her voice clipped into Felix's radio. "Hold tight, I'm on deck." Felix brushed a trembling hand through Milo's sweat-slick hair. "You're safe, mate," he rasped, voice raw. "Just stay with me." The paramedic, seated across from them, worked swiftly. Cooling sprays, a pulse oximeter clipped to Milo's finger, checks of blood pressure and heart rate. Every beep on the monitor felt like an urgent heartbeat of chance. The cabin tilted as the pilot banked northward, revealing the boundless outback below. Ghostly white flats giving way to ochre dunes and the skeletal grove where they had been found. From this vantage, the help, scratched into the sand, looked impossibly small, a fragile plea swallowed by the vastness. Felix pressed his forehead to the plexiglass window, tears mingling with sweat. In that moment, the enormity of their ordeal crystallized. 7 days on the brink, a single message carved in hope. Milo's breathing rattled, each inhale a struggle against fever and exhaustion. Felix leaned closer, murmuring words of reassurance he barely felt himself. "You're doing great, just a bit further." The paramedic caught his eye and offered a curt nod before turning back to her ministrations. Felix watched her gloves move in practiced rhythm, sterile confidence in every motion. As the chopper crossed the ridgeline, the red roof-topped buildings of the Alice Springs Hospital came into view, a beacon of salvation against a landscape that denied mercy. Below them, small figures, paramedics and ground crew, stood ready beside the landing pad, arms outstretched like the promise of solid ground. The rotor blades slowed to a purposeful lull as the pilot announced, "Preparing for landing in 30 seconds." A hush fell inside the cabin. Felix's chest tightened. Every nerve pulsed with anticipation. He tightened his grip on Milo's hand, willing him to understand. The worst was over. With a gentle thump, the helicopter touched down. The paramedic swung open the door and called for a stretcher. Felix rose unsteadily, allowing her to transfer Milo onto the gurney. Milo's eyes met Felix's, flickers of recognition, relief, and something unspoken before he drifted back toward unconsciousness. Felix swallowed hard, brushing his thumb across Milo's wrist. "Come on, brother," Felix whispered. "You've got to hold on." Karen Talbot's voice crackled through Felix's radio. "Great work up there. He's in good hands." Felix exhaled, the tight coil of dread inside him unraveling just enough to let tears fall. He stepped onto the landing pad, shoulders shaking, and watched as the gurney rolled away into the hospital's fluorescent glare. In the chill of the evening air, Felix stood alone for a heartbeat, staring at the horizon where hope and fear had battled for 7 long days. Then he turned toward the doors, each footstep an echo of gratitude and the unspoken vow that, no matter what came next, he would carry Milo's story out of the desert and into whatever life waited beyond its edge. The antiseptic chill of the intensive care unit wrapped around Felix Kramer as he sat beside Milo Hammond's bed, the soft hiss of the ventilator a grim lullaby. His sister, Lena, hovered at his shoulder, her hand a steady anchor on his back. Their mother followed close behind, arms laden with hastily folded blankets and home-baked bread, tokens of comfort in a world carved raw by fear. Felix traced the line of IV tubing snaking into Milo's arm, each inch a testament to the fight that raged within. Helium-thin monitors pulsed with life, heart rate, oxygen saturation, temperature. The numbers glowed in muted green, rhythmic and reassuring. He rose to refill Milo's water pitcher, though he knew his friend could not drink. Carefully he adjusted the cooling pack at Milo's temple, mindful of every crease in the sterile sheets. Outside the glass doors, the night's hush deepened. Through a narrow window, Felix glimpsed nurses moving in hushed choreography, charts updated, vitals checked, prayers murmured between themselves. He remembered the dank wind of the salt flats, the white glare that seared their eyes, and wondered at the fragile thread that had carried Milo back to this place. Lena leaned forward, voice soft as a benediction. "He's stable for now," she told him, though her own voice trembled. Felix closed his eyes, breathing in the mingled scents of disinfectant and lavender sachets. He had insisted on them, hoping to fade the memory of dust and blood. Their mother knelt beside the bed, brushing Milo's damp hair from his forehead. She began to pray in German, an old lullaby woven with pleas for mercy and thanksgiving. Felix watched her lips move, shaped by sorrow and hope. In turn. In that moment, the hospital room transformed into something more, a sanctuary where broken souls gathered to beseech grace. Felix's thoughts drifted to his own faith, once a quiet ember under life's everyday ashes. Now, facing the possibility of never hearing Milo laugh again, that ember flared to life. He reached out, closing his hand over Milo's, and spoke a silent prayer of his own. for healing, for forgiveness, for the chance to bear witness to the world beyond these walls. Hours passed in vigil. The old grandfather clock in the corridor chimed 2:00 a.m., its echoes rolling like distant thunder. Lena slipped away to rest, her silhouette dissolving in the hallway light. Their mother stayed, murmuring in low tones, rocking back and forth as though soothing a cradle. Felix remained, shoulders hunched, leaning into the rhythm of the monitors, as if each beep were a promise that his friend was still fighting, still tethered to life by invisible threads. Just before dawn, Milo's eyelids fluttered. His chest rose in a deeper, steadier breath. Felix pressed his forehead to Milo's hand. "You made it," he whispered. A single tear traced a path through the dust of exhaustion on his cheek. In the half-light of pre-morning, father and son, friend and brother, waited together, bound by fear and faith, by the unspoken vow that no matter how wide the world might stretch, they would cross any desert, bear any burden, to bring one another home. Milo Hammond woke to a quiet that felt foreign. No beeping monitors, no slow hiss of respirator. His world narrowed to the soft weight of blankets tucked beneath his arms and the gentle pressure of a bandaged stump where his lower leg had been. The days since rescue blurred together, fevered delirium, frantic surgery, a knife's cold certainty severing bone to save flesh. Now he lay in a private recovery suite, dawn's pale light filtering through gauzy curtains, time marked only by the measured footsteps of nurses outside his door. Felix Kramer sat beside him, shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed from sleepless watch. He reached out, brushing a strand of sweat-matted hair from Milo's forehead. "Hey," he whispered, voice thick. Milo's eyes fluttered open, pieces of the past week returning in shards, the salt flats, the carved SOS, Felix's tears. He tried to smile, but the effort sent a wave of pain through his leg. Felix flinched at the wince. "Take it slow," he murmured, pressing a cool cloth to Milo's brow. "You've been through hell." His voice caught on the last word, heavy with guilt. "I'm so sorry, Milo. If I'd—" Milo raised a hand, trembling but determined. "Stop," he said, tone gentle but firm. "We're alive." He paused, fingers curling around Felix's. "You saved me." The words hung between them, simple truth gilded by sacrifice. Felix blinked back tears, squeezing Milo's hand in return. Outside, voices rose in a familiar turmoil. Reporters pressed at hospital entrances, cameras trained on entrances and exit signs, social media awash with speculation. Felix had refused every request for comment, retreating into the hush of waiting rooms. Now, as he sat beside Milo, he thought of the tabloid headlines, hero or neglectful friend, and felt each one like a blade against his heart. A nurse arrived with medication, her presence a balm of professionalism. She offered apologies for the noise outside and encouragement that Milo would ambulate soon with a prosthetic. Milo nodded, courage flickering in his gaze. He watched as Felix closed his eyes, as if bracing for more guilt. "I'll deal with them," Milo said quietly, voice stronger than Felix expected. "I'll tell the story right." He caught Felix's gaze, intensity shining through pain's haze. "We owe it to everyone out there still listening." Felix exhaled, relief mingled with renewed responsibility. The weight of their ordeal shifted between them, no longer just a burden, but a shared mission, to honor truth and survival beyond sensational headlines. As the morning sun rose, spilling warmth across the pale room, they sat side by side, broken, healing, determined to rewrite their narrative with honesty and grace. And in that moment, amid antiseptic walls and distant chaos, their friendship was remade. Tempered by trauma, yet unbroken, ready to face whatever came next. Late afternoon light slanted through the hospital's small media room, painting Felix Kramer's face in bruised gold as he sat before a silent monitor. The GoPro footage, recovered from the battered camera at the base of the cliff, rested on a clipboard beside him, its SD card a fragile thread to their darkest hours. He swallowed, hands trembling, and slid the card into the reader. The screen flickered to life. Day 6 of their ordeal, the sun high and cruel overhead. The first frames showed Felix's gaunt profile, sweat streaking his dirt-smudged cheeks. His voice, cracked and desperate, whispered into the tiny microphone. "Okay, this is all my fault. I think he's dying. Please, someone find us." His own eyes on screen widened as he replayed the confession that had haunted his dreams. He leaned forward, each heartbeat echoing in his ears. The camera panned shakily toward Milo, slumped on the sled, fever blazing in every flash of his hollow stare. Flies clustered at his bandaged leg. Felix on tape reached out a hand, voice thick as he pleaded, "I'm so sorry, Milo. I don't know what else to do." The words broke on the grainy playback, reverberating through the room's silence. Felix closed his eyes, pressing his forehead to his palm. The guilt he carried now bore the weight of every world that might watch this footage. He had filmed his own confession in fear of dying without. Absolution. But now the confession demanded context, empathy, a narrative beyond shame. He exhaled and hit play again. This time, he watched the way his hand shook as though he tried to rig a water filter with torn tent fabric, his voice cracking as he described the emptiness around them. "Nothing moves out here but the sun, and it's crushing us." He winced at the tremor in his tone, at the raw edges of panic unfiltered by bravado. On screen, his reflection in a shard of mirrored lens showed red-rimmed eyes fixed on the horizon. He spoke directly into the camera. "Milo's gone. He's gone if I don't find help." The words, once a prayer, now sounded like a promise to a ghost. Felix reached out, touching the frozen frame as though he could bridge the distance of time. He paused the video, letting the static image linger. His own face, gaunt and broken, illuminated by the GoPro's faint night vision glow. The room's quiet pressed in, and he understood that this footage was more than proof of suffering. It was a testament to the fierce bond that had driven him to carry Milo, to carve help into scorching sand, to keep hope alive. Felix lifted his head, tears pooling in his eyes. He replayed the final clip, his trembling lips forming words that only now he could say aloud, without shame. "Thank you, whoever finds this. Please, go back to my family. Tell them I did everything I could." His voice faltered into silence. He reached for the SD card and placed it gently in an evidence envelope, resolve hardening in his chest. This confession would shape their story, not as a tale of reckless tragedy, but as an unvarnished chronicle of fear, love, and redemption. He stood and drew a steadying breath, ready to face the questions that would follow, and to share the truth that no headline could capture. In that light-washed room, Felix Kramer vowed that Milo's story, and his own, would be told with the honesty it so desperately deserved. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the stained-glass windows of St. Barnabas Anglican Church, casting jeweled patterns across the time-worn pews. Inside, families, friends, and townspeople gathered in hushed reverence, folding their hands beneath flickering candles. The air smelled of beeswax and eucalyptus, a soothing amalgam that seemed to soften grief's sharp edges. At the front, a simple wooden cross loomed, its grain worn smooth by a century of whispered prayers. Felix Kramer sat in the third row, shoulders hunched beneath a threadbare jacket. His head remained bowed as the Reverend Jacobs delivered a gentle sermon on mercy, God's grace pouring like rain over parched earth, forgiveness an ember that kindles hope even in the darkest midnight. Felix's gaze drifted upward, where the cross hung in quiet witness, and he felt its presence like an invitation, an offer to lay down guilt and fear. Beside him, Milo Hammond, now fitted with a lightweight prosthetic, pressed a hand to Felix's back. His eyes, once hollow with fever, now glowed with steady warmth. In the weeks since the rescue, Milo's laughter had returned in gentle ripples, a shared joke over sloppy hospital food, a wry grin at news headlines. Yet here, in the hush of sacred space, both men listened for something deeper than words. The service progressed, psalms intoned, eyes closed in prayer, hearts lifted in silence. Then Reverend Jacobs invited the congregation to come forward and light a candle for healing. Felix rose, each step a quiet act of devotion. He selected a slender taper and knelt at the altar rail, eyes stinging as he traced Milo's name across the ledger of prayers. He struck a match, flame flickering against the polished wood, and touched it to the wick. The candle caught, steady and bright, a fragile beacon of contrition and renewal. Felix bowed his head, voice hushed. "Thank you for carrying us through fire and flood. Forgive my pride, my fear, my failure." His confession trailed into silence, swallowed by the hush that followed. Milo approached, kneeling beside him with his own candle. Together they watched the twin flames quiver, two souls bound by suffering and liberation. The congregation murmured a final prayer, voices rising in soft benediction. "May the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." As the closing hymn swelled, a gentle melody of hope, they rose. Outside, the red sky glowed like embers, the distant hills etched in silhouette. Felix stepped into the dusk, candle still burning, and exhaled the weight he'd carried for so long. Beside him, Milo curved an arm around his shoulders, steady and sure. In that twilight hour, among whispered prayers and forgiving light, they felt the quiet power of mercy, and as the church bells tolled the hour, Felix knew their journey was far from over, but that they would walk it together, renewed by faith and bound by the grace they had both come to trust. 6 months later, the red dust of the Outback was a memory flickering on hospital walls and whispered in quiet conversations. Milo Hammond stood on a raised platform at a wildlife photography exhibit in London. The crowd hushed as he pressed a finger to a large print, a ghost gum grove in pale winter light. His prosthetic leg, sleek and carbon fiber black, was nearly hidden beneath tailored trousers. He smiled, soft, gratified, breathing in the hush of applause that followed. Felix Kramer leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching his friend's measured grace. Months of therapy had eased the tremors in his hands. Months of storytelling had sharpened his voice. Behind Milo's photograph, a second panel displayed a still from Felix's final rescue footage, the carved help shimmering in early morning sun. Below it, a plaque read, "Survival, Friendship, Redemption. 7 days in the Outback." After the exhibit, the two slipped into the corridor's half-light. Milo traced the letters with his eyes. "People need to see both sides," he said quietly. "The beauty we sought, and the price we paid." His voice held no bitterness, only calm resolve. Felix nodded, brushing a hand through his hair. "I keep reliving every moment," he admitted, "but sharing it helps." He paused by a window overlooking the Thames. "I never thought I'd tell our story to crowds like this." Milo turned, eyes steady. "You found the courage. We found each other." He tapped his prosthetic with a gentle smile. "It's not what I expected, losing a leg, but I'm still here." Felix exhaled, relief easing into his chest. "You're living proof of mercy," he said, "and I'm lucky to be part of that." That evening, they returned to Felix's flat, walls lined with maps and camera gear, the scent of eucalyptus and antiseptic lingering like an old hymn. Over mugs of strong tea, they pored over footage for a final documentary cut. The raw confession from Day 6, Milo's fevered prayers, the moment Ranger Talbot's lens caught the SOS, all wove into a narrative neither wanted to sensationalize, but both felt compelled to honor. Outside, rain tapped against the window, a gentle counterpoint to the Outback's ruthless sun. Felix paused the playback, watching Milo's reflection merge with the flickering screen. "There are still questions," he said. "Why we risked so much, how close we came." Milo nodded, his gaze drifting to the map of their route, a red line scrawled by drifting sand and desperation. "Some answers stay buried in dust," he replied. "But we uncovered the truth that matters. We survived." Felix reached across the table, clasping Milo's hand. "To survival," he said, voice soft. "To survival," Milo echoed, warmth in his tone. And as the rain fell, washing London streets clean, the two friends, scarred, healed, and bound by an unbreakable bond, prepared to share their story with the world. In the echoes of the dust, they found not an end, but a beginning, a testament to the fragile resilience of the human spirit and the mercy that carries us home.